We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Theater of the Beloved Community's Get Out the Vote. Those words, the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, provide us with the privilege of voting for our elected officials. It is the duty of every American to respect that privilege and exercise their right to vote. This evening will feature both current students and alumni of the St. Peter's community, as well as members of our incredible administration and faculty, who will share with us their thoughts on this most sacred duty. Some of the performers are reading words of historical giants who advocated for the right to vote for all. Some are reading stories about issues facing our collective body, and some have even written their own thoughts, voicing their passion for our democratic right to vote. As you watch the performances and listen to their words, they give voice to, I hope you will feel inspired to get involved in this year's election. Your voice matters, and it's time to make sure that it is heard. Welcome to the Theater of Beloved Community's second performance, Get Out the Vote.
To me, democracy means incorporating all members and contributors of a society into the system that governs them. And honestly, it means more than just incorporating everyone, it means empowering them. In American society, it doesn't take much inspection to find that this isn't the case. People are forced to make choices every day that don't empower them, that do the opposite of empower them. They make choices, they're forced to make choices that disempower them from participating in the political process and oftentimes in life in general. I want to give you an example. My friend is an MD PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins University. There, he saw a patient back in February. Now, this is before the first wave of COVID really got started on the East Coast. This is when it was just picking up steam. A woman came in to his hospital with flu-like symptoms and recent travel from Wuhan, China. Now, just hearing that, there is a very real possibility that this woman had COVID-19. But since she didn't have health insurance, she couldn't get the necessary treatment to take care of her at the time. And so she left the hospital the same way that she came in, on a bus. And she was probably in contact with at least dozens of people, because this is back in February when people were still going to work, getting groceries, and kids were still going to school. And so she probably came in contact with untold numbers of people. And then at home, she came in contact with her family. That's just one example of probably the dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of innocent people who might have had COVID early in the pandemic, but they couldn't get treatment because of our dysfunctional private health insurance system. Our government perpetuates this system because our elected officials are elected by private insurance dollars. These rich, old, white men make our lives worse by perpetuating these systems that do the opposite of empower us. They put us at risk. We have to vote in a direction that opposes this dysfunction. We have to take care of all members of our society because, as I said the woman I mentioned a minute ago is proof that our lives are interconnected. And when we take care of our most vulnerable, when we take care of each other, we all stand to benefit in a way that goes beyond the benefit that any one person receives. I can't vote, so the best I can do is encourage you to do it for me. Please, vote in a direction that opposes this dysfunction, and vote in a direction that makes life better for everyone, not just yourself. Thank you.
Advocating for voting rights has always been important to my family. One of our most staunchest members of my family was Nellie Quander. Nellie Quander was born in Washington, D.C. on February 11, 1880, to John Pearson Quander and Hannah Bruce Ford Quander. Nellie was a member of the Quander family, which in 1984 documented 300 years of residence in Maryland and Virginia. It is recognized as the longest recorded Black family in American history. These Quanders are descendants of Nancy Carter Quander, an enslaved woman on the Mount Vernon plantation who former President George Washington freed in his last will and testament. Nellie enrolled at Howard University in 1910 while continuing to work as a school teacher. She joined the sorority Alpha Kappa Alpha in 1911 and by June 1912 graduated magna cum laude from Howard University with a Bachelor's of Arts in History, Economics, and Political Science. Quander completed work for her master's degree from Columbia University and earned a certificate from the New York School of Social Work. In 1936, Quander was awarded a diploma from Uppsala University in Sweden. Quander later taught social sciences at Shaw Junior High School for more than 30 years and retired in 1950. Quander always remained dedicated to Alpha Kappa Alpha, and upon receiving notice of the intent to changes to the organization, in October 1912, she spearheaded the incorporation process that was finalized in January 1913. After incorporation, Quander became the president of the first directorate. She served as the national president between the years of 1913 and 1919 and would go on to create chapters in Illinois, Ohio, and Kansas. When the 1913 women's suffrage procession was planned by suffragettes Alice Paul and Lucy Burns for the National American Women's Suffrage Association, Nellie Quander wrote Paul several times requesting clarification on whether or not African American women, specifically those of Howard University, would be allowed to march with their white peers. There had been gossip that the march was going to be segregated for fear of conflicting with the white suffragettes of the South. Unfortunately, Alice Paul never answered any of Nellie Quander's concerns. Nellie Quander was a lifelong advocate for civil rights, for women's rights, social reform, and education, and I'm proud to call her a relative. Here, reading one of the letters she wrote to Alice Paul, is fellow Alpha Kappa Alpha member and Director of Internships, Professional Development, Career Engagement, and Experimental Learning at St. Peter's University, Ms. Sandra Edwards Busing Riley.
February 17th, 1913. Miss Alice Paul, Chairman, Woman Suffrage Parade. Dear Madam, fearing that a letter which I sent you has gone astray, I am sending you the same matter. There are a number of college women of Howard University who would like to participate in the woman suffrage procession on Monday, March the 3rd. We do not wish to enter if we must meet with discrimination on account of race affiliation. Can you assign us to a desirable place in the college women's section? There is still another request. Our sorority had hoped to have had Miss Jane Addams to address us next month. But we have learned today that she is to sail for Egypt next week. From among the many noted women who will be here in connection with the inauguration, can you put us in communication with some one of them, one who is an eloquent, forcible, and scholarly lecturer, someone of national, if not worldwide fame? We are most desirous of having a good speaker to address the college women of Howard University. We can assure such an one a large and appreciative audience. Hoping that you may find it convenient to send me an early reply, and thanking you for such consideration, I remain, yours truly, Nellie M. Quander, President, aka Sorority, Howard University.
On October 12th, 2020, we remembered. We remembered the lives of Indigenous peoples whose strife and never-ending pain is a signal to us of how much they have endured, how much of their being, spiritual, livelihood, cultural has been erased. We remember the ways in which the arrival of Christopher Columbus to these lands, the lands of the Americas, simultaneously meant the eradication of the first people of these lands. And in so doing, we remember the reasons why their voices must be uplifted. We remember the truth about a day like October 12th. And we remember to continue to tell the stories, to continue to uplift the voices, and to continue to remember. For Indigenous people, Indigenous peoples, the first peoples of this land, have every right to continue to fight for their sovereignty, for their land sovereignty. And so by doing so, we hope to remember by reading a passage from a book entitled Braiding Seagrass, Indigenous Women, Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The chapter is entitled In the Footsteps of Nana Bosho, Becoming Indigenous to Place. And it reads, After all these generations since Columbus, some of the wisest of native elders still puzzle over the people who came to our shores. They look at the toll on the land and say, the problem with these new people is that they don't have both feet on the shore. One is still on the boat. They don't seem to know whether they're staying or not. This same observation is heard from some contemporary scholars who see in the social pathologies and relentlessly materialist culture the fruit of homelessness, a rootless past. America has been called the home of second chances. For the sake of the peoples and the land, the urgent work of the second man may be to set aside the ways of the colonist and become indigenous to place. But can Americans, as a nation of immigrants, learn to live here as if we were staying, with both feet on the shore? What happens when we truly become native to a place, when we finally make a home? Where are the stories that lead the way? If time does in fact eddy back on itself, maybe the journey of the first man will provide footsteps to guide the journey of the second. End passage. The chapter and its ending summarizes really the sentiment shared here. And as one might imagine, braiding seagrass, or the knowledge exchange that happens from braiding seagrass, the same way knowledge is exchanged by braiding one's hair, a practice Indigenous women have long held sacred. We hope that in concluding with this passage, we can remember the sacredness, not just of seagrass, not just of braiding one's hair, but about our presence here, and braiding ourselves, really rooting ourselves in a land that did not belong to us, that was in fact stolen, and that every year we should commit to remembering the ways in which land sovereignty and indigenous rights and indigenous justice must be at the forefront of a day like October 12th. The ending of the chapter begins. Our immigrant plant teachers offer a lot of different models for how not to make themselves welcome on a new continent. Garlic mustard poisons the soil so that native species will die. Tamarisk uses up all the water. Foreign invaders like loosestrife, kudso, and cheatgrass have the colonizing habit of taking over others' homes and growing without regard to limits. But plantain is not like that. Its strategy was to be useful, to fit into small places, to coexist with others around the dooryard, to heal wounds. Plantain is so prevalent, so well integrated that we think of it as native. It has learned the name bestowed by botanists for plants that have become our own. Plantain is not indigenous, but naturalized. This is the term we use for the foreign-born when they become citizens in our country. They pledge to uphold the laws of the state. They might well uphold Nana Bozho's original instructions, too. Maybe the task assigned to second man is to unlearn the motto of Kudso and follow the teachings of white man's footstep. To strive to become naturalized to place, to throw off the mindset of the immigrant. Being naturalized to place means to live as if this is the land that feeds you, as if these are the streams from which you drink, that build your body and fill your spirit. To become naturalized is to know that your ancestors lie in this ground. Here you will give your gifts and meet your responsibilities. To become naturalized is to live as if your children's futures matters. To take care of the land as if our lives and the lives of all of our relatives depend on it, because they do. As time circles around on itself again, maybe white man's footstep is following in Nana Bozho's. Perhaps plantain will line the homeward path. We could follow. White man's footstep, generous and healing, grows with its leaves so close to the ground that each step is a greeting to Mother Earth. The end. On behalf of the Theater of the Beloved community, we thank you for your time, and we thank you for remembering.
Another pressing issue that makes voting imperative this election cycle is the existential threat of climate change. Specifically, human-made climate change, anthropogenic climate change. The United States government has been aware of this crisis for 40 years now, roughly. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter commissioned an investigation of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. He understood that we needed to do a lot. Every precaution needed to be taken. Unfortunately, even though he cared deeply about the conservation of the Earth's resources, his protections were rolled back, revoked by the successive administration. And climate change was deemed unworthy of study, let alone action. Climate change should also not be a partisan issue. The Environmental Protection Agency was founded in 1970 under President Richard Nixon, a Republican. And he also passed the Clean Air Act of the same year and the Clean Water Act of 1972. The story from the book I'm going to read to you synthesizes the theft of indigenous land and the destruction of this continent's ecosystems, including deforestation and contamination of air and water. A River Ran Wild by Lynn Cherry. Long ago, a river ran wild through a land of towering forests. Bears, moose, and herds of deer, hawks, and owls all made their homes in the peaceful river valley. Geese paused on their long migration and rested on its banks. Beavers, turtles, and schools of fish swam in its clear waters. One day, a group of native people, searching for a place to settle, came upon the river valley. From atop the highest mountain, known today as Mount Wachusett, New Hampshire, they saw the river nestled in its valley, a silver sliver in the sun. They came down from the mountain, and at the river's edge they knelt to quench their thirst with its clear water. Pebbles shone up from the bottom. "Let us settle by this river," said the chief of the native people. He named the river Noshaway, river with the pebbled bottom. By the Noshaway, Chief Weewa's people built a village. They gathered cattails from the riverbanks to thatch their dwellings. In the forest, they set fires to clear brush from the forest floor. In these clearings, they planted extra corn and squash for eating. They made arrows for hunting and canoes for river travel. When the Indians hunted in the forest or caught salmon in the river, they killed only what they needed for themselves, for food and clothing. They asked all the forest creatures that they killed to please forgive them. The Nashua people saw a rhythm in their lives and in the seasons. The river, land, and forest provided all that they needed. The Nashua had lived for generations by the clear, clean, flowing river, when one day a pale-skinned trader came with a boatload of treasures. He brought shiny metal knives, colored beads, and cooking kettles, mirrors, tools, and bolts of bright cloth. His wares seemed like magic. The Nashua welcomed him, traded furs, and soon a trading post was built. In the many years that followed, the white settlers' village and others like it grew, and the Noshaway became the Nashua. The settlers worked together to clear land by cutting down the forests, which they thought were full of danger, wilderness that they would conquer. They hunted wolves and beaver, killing much more than they needed. Extra pelts were sent to England in return for goods and money. The settlers built sawmills along the river, which the Nashua's current powered. They built dams to make the mill ponds that were used to store the water. They cut down the trees and floated the trunks down the river. The logs were cut up into lumber, which was used for building houses. The settlers built fences for their pastures, plowed the fields, and planted crops. They called the land their own and told the Indians not to trespass. Hunting land disappeared as the settlers cleared the forest. Indian fishing rights vanished as the settlers claimed the river. The Indians' ways were disrupted and they began to fight the settlers. The wars raged for many years, but the Indians' bows and arrows were no match against gunpowder. And so the settlers' rifles drove the Indians from the land. Through 100 years of fighting, the Nashua was a healthy river. Sometimes dammed for grist and sawmills, but still flowing wild and free. Muskrats, fish, and turtles still swam from bank to bank. Deer still came to drink from the river. And muskrats, owls, raccoons, and beaver fed there. At the start of the new century, an industrial revolution came to the Nashua's banks and waters. Many new machines were invented. Some spun thread from wool and cotton, others wove the thread into cloth. Some machines turned wood to pulp, and others made the pulp into paper. Leftover pulp and dye and fiber were dumped into the Nashua River, whose swiftly flowing current washed away the waste. These were times of much excitement, times of progress and invention. Factories along the Nashua River made new things of new materials. Telephones and radios and other things were made of plastics. Chemicals and plastic waste were also dumped into the river. Soon the Nashua's fish and wildlife grew sick from this pollution. The paper mills continued to pollute the Nashua's waters. Every day for many decades, pulp was dumped into the Nashua, and as the pulp clogged up the river began to run more slowly. As the pulp decomposed, bad smells welled up from the river. People who lived near the river smelled its stench and stayed far from it. Each day as the mills dyed paper red, green, blue, and yellow, the Nashua ran whatever color the paper was dyed. Soon, no fish lived in the river. No birds stopped on their migration. The Nashua was dark and dirty. The Nashua was slowly dying. One night, Oweana, a descendant of Wiwa, who still lived by the Nashua, had a dream so vivid he awoke in wide-eyed wonder. In his dream, Chief Wiwa's spirit returned to the river and saw it as it was now, still and deadly. Chief Wiwa mourned for the Nashua, but where his tears fell upon the dirty waters, the waters were cleansed until the river flowed more freely once again. The next morning, Oweana went to speak to his friend Marian. When he told her of this dream, she said, "I had this dream also." And together they decided that something must be done. Marian traveled to each town along the Nashua. She spoke of the river's history and of her vision to restore it. No longer do we have a river. It's a stinking, smelly sewer. But it wasn't always this way. People listened and imagined a sparkling river full of fish. They imagined pebbles shining up through clear waters. They signed petitions and sent letters. They protested to politicians and showed them jars of dirty water. They convinced the factories to build a plant to process the waste. They persuaded the paper mills to stop dumping. Finally, new laws were passed and the factories stopped polluting. Slowly, the Nashua's current began to clean its water. Year by year, the river carried away the dyes and fiber to the ocean. Marian and Oweana thanked the people who had helped to clean the Nashua. Through the meadows, towns, and cities, the Nashua once again flows freely. Paper pulp no longer clogs it. Chemicals no longer foul it. Now we walk along its banks and row upon its fragrant waters. We can set our boats upon it and with its current drift downstream. Once again, the river runs wild through the towering forest greenway. Red-tailed hawks and barred owls live here. Geese pause from their long migration and rest on the riverbanks. Deer come to drink from the river's water. We too have settled by this river. The Nashua is what we call it, river with the pebbled bottom.
Governor Jay Inslee on the climate crisis. We cannot give in to defeat and pessimism. Climate Week this year coincides with clear skies in Washington state for the first time in almost 2 weeks. In just a few days in early September, Washington state saw enough acres burned, more than 600,000, to reach our second worst fire season on record. Our worst fire season came only 5 years ago. Wildfires aren't new to the West, but their scope and danger today is unlike anything firefighters have seen. People up and down the West Coast, young and old, in rural areas and in cities, were choking on smoke for days on end, trapped in their homes. Fires like these are becoming the norm, not the exception. That's because as the climate changes, our fires change. Climate scientists tell us that if greenhouse gas emissions continue on their current path, later this century, the average year in Washington will eventually be warmer than the single hottest year of the 20th century. The heat leaves our land and vegetation dry and primed for ignition, with blazes for which our landscapes are not evolved to cope. We're seeing more acres burned and more days with our state swathed in hazardous smoke and ash. Rain, cooler weather, and heroic fighting efforts have finally tamped down the fires and poor air quality. But the burn scars remain, and they are most acutely felt by those who lost homes, businesses, and loved ones in fires this year. I have seen the chaos firsthand in recent visits to burned areas both east and west of the Cascade Mountains, as communities in Malden, Bonnie Lake, and Graham, Washington recover from the damage done this month. It's not enough for us as leaders to help our towns recover from one devastating event after another. We need a plan to stop these increasingly ferocious natural disasters from becoming uncontrollable. The situation demands that climate change be front and center in this plan, because it is the root and stem of the new challenges we face in disaster response. While wildfires are the most recent and some of the most visceral images of climate change, they are unfortunately just one manifestation of a climate crisis with far-reaching implications. From the woods and prairies to the oceans, rivers, and streams, we see the damaging effects of climate change. West Coast marine waters are acidifying at twice the global rate. Our streams are becoming too warm to support salmon, and our agricultural productivity is falling as a result of record heat. But we cannot give in to defeat and pessimism. This is not a lost cause. There is broad consensus on what we need to do to slow and turn back the effects of human-driven climate change. All hands on deck for a global decarbonization that grows jobs and protects communities. Every year, Climate Week gives us the opportunity to highlight this urgent need. But we need every week to be Climate Week. Given the science, knowledge, and tools at our disposal, it is unacceptable that more has not been done to address the terrifying implications of climate change in the 21st century. We have no more time to waste. We face a powerful oil and gas industry that has sunk its claws into Congress and numerous state governments, and a presidential administration backed by a major political party dedicated to protecting polluters and spreading lies and confusion about the science. On the flip side is the urgent and painfully clear scientific consensus, coupled with the fact that the majority of Americans support action now on climate change. This is a battle that we can and must win, beginning with our votes in November. And winning the fight won't just protect our communities from the dangerous effects of climate change. It will create enormous new economic opportunity. The latest jobs report from E2, a national nonpartisan group of business leaders and investors focused on sustainable energy policies, shows there are already more than 3 million clean energy jobs in America today. If we can find the will to massively accelerate the development of renewable resources, we can create millions of more jobs. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that facts are stubborn things, and denial can be fatal. The federal government's failure to accept the reality of the COVID-19 crisis once again demonstrated why aloofness is no replacement for proactive leadership. While we know this administration would be wise to change its destructive path by bringing our country back into the Paris Agreement on climate change, by putting in place strong, clean car standards, or by restoring key environmental protections raised by Trump's cronies, we know they won't. However, public opinion is clear even after years of misinformation and downright lies. There is not enough oil money in the world to stop the American people from rising up for what's right, and it's time to hit back. Let this climate week be a reminder not merely of the long road ahead, but of our own power to make that journey together. Start now, so that in Climate Week 2021, we'll have a little less distance to cover.
Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, delivered probably one of her most famous and notorious dissent in Shelby v. Holder in 2013, in which a majority of the Supreme Court of the United States struck down a provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 known as preclearance. Here is Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent. Instead, the court strikes coverage provision because in its view, the provision is not based on, quote, current conditions, end quote. It discounts, however, that one such condition was the preclearance remedy in place in the covered jurisdictions, a remedy Congress designed both to catch discrimination before it causes harm and to guard against return to old ways. Volumes of evidence supported Congress's determination that the prospect of retrogression was real. Throwing out preclearance as it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. The sad irony of today's decision lies in its utter failure to grasp why the VRA has proven effective. The court appears to believe that the VRA's success in eliminating the specific devices extant in 1965 means that the preclearance is no longer needed. With that belief and the argument derived from it, history repeats itself. The same assumption that the problem could be solved when particular methods of voting discrimination are identified and eliminated was indulged and proven wrong repeatedly prior to the VRA's enactment. Unlike prior statutes, which singled out particular tests or devices, the VRA is grounded in Congress's recognition of, quote, the variety and persistence, end quote, of measures designed to impair minority voting rights. In truth, the evolution of voting discrimination into more subtle and second-generation barriers is powerful evidence that a remedy as effective as preclearance remains vital to protect minority voting rights and prevent backsliding. Beyond question, the VRA is no ordinary legislation. It is extraordinary because Congress embarked on a mission long delayed and of extraordinary importance: to realize the purpose and promise of the 15th Amendment. For half a century, a concerted effort has been made to end racial discrimination in voting. Thanks to the Voting Rights Act, progress, once the subject of a dream, has been achieved and continues to be made. The record supporting the 2006 reauthorization of the VRA is also extraordinary. It was described by the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee as, quote, one of the most extensive considerations of any piece of legislation that the United States Congress has dealt with in the 27 and a half years, end quote, he had served in the House. After extensive evidence gathering and deliberative process, Congress reauthorized the VRA, including the coverage provision, which with overwhelming bipartisan support. It was the judgment of Congress that, quote, 40 years has not been a sufficient amount of time to eliminate the vestiges of discrimination following nearly 100 years of disregard for the dictates of the 15th Amendment, and to ensure that the right of all citizens to vote is protected as guaranteed by the Constitution, end quote. That determination of the body empowered to enforce the Civil War amendments, quote, by appropriate legislation, end quote, merits the court's utmost respect. In my judgment, the court errs egregiously by overriding Congress's determination.
I'm speaking to you for what democracy fully means to me and why voting matters, in the long run as well as the short. Democracy is a system created to benefit not the people in power, but the people who are here living, doing day to day as citizens of this state. We are those citizens, and it is our time to go out and elect actual leaders that would help us and allow us to flourish as we should be in this country. We need to go out and vote, either physically and safely or by mail-in ballots, and make our voices be heard as well. We are living in a time of fear, worries, and turbulence that will either see our world go towards a better and more just nation, or a worse and more divided nation. I know that I have a chance to rectify what has been happening throughout the last 4 years with my vote. I know that my vote matters because it establishes my voice to be heard in elections and proposals that would benefit each and every one of us equally and fairly. I know that my voice matters because I know that my voice matters as well. And I don't want to be defined as inconsequential in the eyes of the populace and in the eyes of the current administration. No. That's not why I'm here. I'm here as a citizen of the United States. I'm here to vote for people who value my life as well as your life at the end of the day. You may feel as though that this is a misunderstanding or an exaggeration of what is happening. But because of the virus, because of the leadership of our country, and because of the way people have been feeling for the last 4 years, this election is critical to the progression of the United States as a society. As well as that, it is also important to vote for your voice actually matters at the end of the day. Your voice matters as well as my voice in both local and federal elections. I know that my voice matters because I believe that I have the power to lead our country towards a true democracy with my vote. And I know for sure you and everyone else has the same amount of power, has the same amount of vocal outreach that would be able to create a more just society. The leaders that exist in your community are the ones who will be passing laws and legislation that would affect me and you for quite some time, either good or bad. Voting matters for the exercising of your voting rights, allow you to be a full citizen of the United States and a prominent voice in the decisions of this country.
The late civil rights activist and U.S. Senator of Georgia, John Lewis, said, "The vote is precious. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democratic society, and we must use it." John Lewis was right. Our vote is our most powerful tool. I'll even add that voting is our superpower. I hope you were inspired by our performers tonight to make a plan to vote. This election may very well be the most consequential election of our time. If you are feeling less than enthusiastic about this election because your candidate didn't make it out of the primaries, or the candidates don't quite align perfectly with your views, I understand. But I hope you will consider this critical advice. Voting is like public transportation. You don't sit at the bus stop waiting for the perfect bus to arrive. You get on the bus that gets you the closest to your destination. If you haven't made a plan to vote yet, go to vote.org to learn about registering to vote, mail-in or absentee ballots, early voting locations near you, and your November 3rd Election Day polling place. If you are voting by absentee or mail-in, make sure you return your ballot as soon as possible. Look for ballot drop-off locations near you to ensure your ballot makes it before Election Day. Also, make sure you followed all of the instructions. Check for any security envelopes or required signatures before sending it on its way. Follow the progress of your ballot from receipt to acceptance with your state's election board and make sure your vote has been counted. If you are unable to vote because of your age, your immigration status, or you simply missed your state's registration deadline, there are other ways to get involved. Talk to your friends about why this election matters to you. Encourage them to get out and make a plan to vote. Consider volunteering to work at a polling place or even phone banking for the candidate you believe in. And if you're voting in person, double check that you are registered to vote by checking vote.org and head to the polls. Make sure you take the necessary precautions to vote safely. Grab your mask, some hand sanitizer, make sure you have your ID, and head to the polls. Now, lines are expected to be longer this year. Make sure you schedule enough time to cast your ballot. Dress warmly,
Bring snacks and water, maybe even grab a book or make a playlist and get ready to rock out for your vote. Be aware of any attempts at voter intimidation. If you feel like someone is acting inappropriately, aggressively, or bullying others, or even yourself, report it to the poll workers or any law enforcement nearby. Any attempts to block yours or others' right to vote is prohibited by federal law. Be careful about displaying anything that might signal how you could vote. A pen, a hat, a shirt, a tote bag, because it could attract unwanted attention. Remember your rights and do not let anyone try to suppress your vote. Once you're inside your polling place and you're checking in, watch the poll worker to make sure they don't write or mark on your ballot if your state does paper ballots. Although the majority of poll workers are wonderful, honest people, a random mark on your ballot could disqualify it. Politely ask the poll worker for a new ballot and head to your private voting booth. Make sure you're marking your ballots correctly and clearly as indicated by the instructions. After you are done, return your ballot and make sure that it is safely and securely stored away to be counted. Now, if the poll worker can't find your name on the voter roster, don't panic. Although the chances of this happening are low, it is still possible. Simply ask the poll worker for a provisional ballot and follow all of the instructions. And there's a lot at stake in this election. Take the time to research your candidates and any other issues appearing on your state's ballot. Follow the instructions and make your plan to vote. This year, I am voting for the dreamers, for the underrepresented and the oppressed, for the millions with pre-existing conditions and everyone's right to health care. I'm voting for the right to love without discrimination, for equality, diversity, and inclusion, for immigrants, for economic equality and affordable education, for our planet, for my students, for our future. What are you voting for? As President Barack Obama said, there is no such thing as a vote that doesn't matter. So get up, get out, and go vote.